Welcome back to the Foundational Skills mini course, Module 6. This module is all focused on practice, practice, practice. Once again, I'm Carrie Swanson.
And I remain David Lieben.
Always. And Student Achievement Partners information is right here for you. We hope you have been finding some useful resources to support you in your work. So our goals for this module. Today we are focusing very specifically on explaining why and how practice is essential to student skill development. And then we're going to spend some time distinguishing between strong practice opportunities and weak practice opportunities for students. And then we're going to spend a little bit more time narrowing our focus around fluency in particular. So we'll start off just thinking about why practice is important. I want you to take a second to think about a skill that you might have acquired in your life or a skill that you've seen someone acquire. So whether it was music or sports or calligraphy, anytime you're learning a discrete skill, practice comes into play. So clearly you can't learn to be a pianist by watching someone play the piano. I know you can't learn to be a basketball player by watching basketball on TV. And so as you're thinking about the skill that you acquired or you observed, you're probably picturing the practice that you did. David, do you have any skills that you've acquired?
Very little.
Reading research.
Yeah, I don't know if that really qualifies as a skill. Anything that was a skill with your hands, I required tremendous amount of repetition. Mm-hmm. They tried to make me a quarterback in the 9th grade when I applied to high school football, but I couldn't take the snap from the center without dropping it. And they persisted in keeping me there until eventually they gave up. So I can't think of any skill I acquired.
Well, if you have more skills than David, maybe you learned to make pottery, maybe you learned a sport. You can probably picture the practice and replication of the skill that you had to work on. And with a lot of time and effort and probably corrective feedback too, practice could lead to skill acquisition. And so we know that research actually shows that poor readers can make improvements when they have sufficient practice. And this practice helps them to build skills incrementally to gain automaticity and to understand how the alphabetic system works. So connecting any sort of skill-based thinking to the teaching of reading skills, early reading skills, can really help you think about the role that practice can play. David had spoken a little bit earlier about, in a previous module, about the Shaywitz study and the connection there to building the brain. And so, David, you want to talk a little bit more about the imaging that happened there and the impact on student practice?
Yes, this was what I mentioned about connecting the parts of the brain that deal with auditory processing, which is the same that deals with phonological processing, and the parts of the brain that deal with orthographic processing, which has come to be known as Broca's area. And when students had a structured phonics program, as we've been talking about these last number of weeks, when students who began that program, they took a magnetic picture of their brain and we're looking for the neuronal structure, essentially the thickness of the neurons connecting those different parts of the brain. And they were very thin. And after X amount of months of a structured phonics program, they did the imaging again. And once again, they saw that the neurons connecting these different parts of the brain had become much thicker. So this was a study done by Sally Shaywitz. I think Sally was her first name. They're a couple, and they're both MDs that have been working with reading for a long time. So it's about as dramatic evidence of the effects of practice as you can get.
So we try to make this tangible, again, for you. So we're recommending at least 5 practice opportunities for each new sound and spelling pattern. Though, as David has said numerous times, some students may need far more than that. This is just a general rule of thumb to help you think about what lots of practice means in the classroom. And just keeping in mind that practice can mean many different things, many different types of tasks. So if you look back at the things that we discussed, the examples that we gave in our phonics module, there were oral tasks, there were games and movements and songs, there was decoding words or sentences, there was reading in decodable readers, reading from text and then encoding through spelling. So just thinking about this as a very fluid process that moves from student to teacher to student to teacher, practicing teacher modeling, students practicing, getting feedback and practicing again. There's just so many different ways that this can look in the classroom.
I want to go back again to something that we touched on in the introductory session. There's this sense that structured phonics does require repetition. And there's this sense that children don't like repetition, which is about as far from reality, I think, as you can get, for a number of reasons. I remember watching a TV show with my grandchild, who was about 3.5 at the time, and he was telling me it was the most popular children's television show on at the time, and I forget the name of it. And he was telling me what would happen next consistently. And I was starting to think, this kid is really a genius. How does he know what's going to happen next? Fortunately, his mother came in and said, he's seen it 3 times or 4 times. The show repeats the same exact episode every day, and the children love it. So that's number 1. Number 2, again, remember that for kindergarten and first grade students, especially those 2 years, that they're breaking down the code, that they're learning what these squiggly shapes that they've been seeing when they've been read to, or they knew of on some level, and they're able to determine what they say by themselves is quite thrilling. And it would take a lot of repetitions before it would lose that excitement. Thirdly, we tend to like things that we're good at. And repetition with something when you succeed is very rarely a problem compared to repetition with something that you're frustrated with. So there is a lot of repetition that some children will need, and there's very little that other children will need. But neither group will suffer, nor will you go to hell for having them do this repetition.
And we're kind of reiterating a few of the things that we started with in this course and that we've gone into as you're putting all these pieces together. So a reminder once again that practice should be in and out of context. So discrete skill practice and connected to text. And that it can vary in terms of the structure in the classroom. So it's whole group, it's individual, and it's small group. So really making sure to take advantage of those varied structures and forms. So we are going to get to look a little more closely again at our sample first grade phonics lesson. And so we've been looking at a few clips along the course throughout the course of this course. Looking at the long I as spelled I consonant E. And we're going to see a few of the samples throughout one lesson. This all happens in one lesson where students have varied opportunities for practice. So starting with the phonemic awareness and the oral practice here.
Sometimes it's in the beginning of a word. Say ice, idea, island. Sometimes the I sound is at the end or in the middle of the word. Say try, fly, pie. Nice.
So we just got to hear all of the students just practicing with that oral discrimination of the sound and the different places that they might be able to hear it. Now we'll see a little bit more explicit phonics instruction with student practice. So in this case, the students are going to be able to practice the sound and spelling pattern they're learning on whiteboards where the teacher is able to monitor them pretty closely.
Nice. I have some words with the I sound that you're going to spell on your board. First, write the I sound. Say I. We'll move on to the first word when all friends have the I sound. We use a V to show that they're working together as a team. I, leave a space, E. Mona, write the I sound first. Tristan, write the I sound first, like me. I'll erase this so you're not confused. This is what we're writing right now. Good. The first word I want you to spell using that I sound is bite. Repeat. Bite. We'll tap this one out together. Bites. Bites. I heard 3 sounds. Bite. How would you spell that?
So notice that the students are doing the writing. They're practicing that new sound, but they're doing it with a lot of support. The teacher is monitoring, giving immediate feedback. No one is securing bad habits here. They are immediately accountable for accurate representation, but they're not at this point just watching the teacher. I know when I'm in a yoga class, I don't get any better if I watch the teacher do the pose. I need to do the pose myself and get that corrective feedback. Anything else to add so far?
No, not at this point.
All right. And then we know that the last piece of, or the next, piece of practice was a little less teacher support now. Students in this lesson do a dictation. So now they're practicing that same sound and spelling pattern that they were practicing with the whiteboards where the teacher was giving that very close feedback. But now they're doing it independently at their seats in this dictation.
Right. Fin. Like the fish in our tank all have fins, but you're just writing one. Fin. Good. Like the fin of a fish. No, do not do that. When you're ready, turn fin into fine. Make sure you're touching each line and saying the sounds. Good.
So here you see the students working with the sound that they already knew, the short I, and then seeing the difference in words that are spelled with the long I, so they can start to watch for that when they are reading. And in this case, the students were a little more independent than they were when they were with the whiteboards and the carpet. In this 50-minute lesson, this was one 50-minute lesson, there were so many opportunities for student practice. So there was oral discrimination with the sound. They practiced saying words with the sound. They read words in isolation. They wrote the words on their whiteboards, on their slates, and they wrote the words on the dictation, and then they did the decodable reading, which we got the chance to see in the last module. So when you're very attentive to the practice students are doing, and when you're really careful about selecting strong tasks, you can do a whole lot just within the context of one lesson. So we're going to actually pause here and just give you a chance to take a look at some grade-specific guidance. We know that creating practice opportunities in the classroom is a real big feat for teachers, and specifically centers or small group time that can enable teachers to pull groups and give their attention to small groups while other students are working. And so we did come up with some suggestions. These can be found in the guidance documents, but they're also pulled out on your handout to just be in one place by grade, so that you can take a look at these suggestions and just think about ways to make sure that student practice is strong without it being an impossible feat in the classroom.
In some of the schools that I've observed, including even schools that really have many struggling children in first grade, second grade, schools where 1/4 of the kids in third grade are reading at a pre-primer level or primer level. It was somewhat surprising that when they came to the words in their grade level book, they often decoded them accurately, but far too slowly to be able to come even close to comprehending what they're reading. What that means is that they've established the neuronal or structure in the brain for that spelling sound pattern. If they're struggling with the word neighbor, but they get it correct, but far too slowly, that means that piece of information for the EIGH spelling sound pattern and the R-controlled O, is there, but it's not implanted as well as it needs to be. And the only way in the world to implant that is through repetition. So if you do have children that you think are moving fast and they're getting it right, and you feel they don't need to do all 4 activities, just be really, really sure. Because most little kids are perfectly happy to go on doing something that they know how to do for an extra 10 or 15 minutes, and weigh that against the fact that they might in the future, near future in this case, be decoding too slowly. And once that cascade of decoding too slow, that cascades down the years to all kinds of problems.
When we talk about fluency, you can think about the levels of fluency that you might be able to push students to if you want to differentiate high, because that's another way that you can build on the skills they have and push them towards the next set of skills. So we're going to turn now to some guidelines for quality practice. I know some of you have quality instructional materials already. Some of you signed up for this course because you would like to adopt a new curriculum and you want ideas about what quality looks like. Some of you create your own materials, so huge range. And in a world where you can pull teacher resources from many unchecked sources, it's really important to have some quality control guidelines in mind. You need to be judging the quality of the resources that you're pulling. And so we're trying to kind of give you some parameters to make that a little bit of an easier task. So take a look at this assignment here. There is an error. I want to make sure you can find the error. And so if you haven't found it immediately, pause the webinar and discuss it with your colleagues. And I will now show you the error if you weren't sure. There is an error here. This is supposed to be a task about short vowel sounds, focusing on short O, and cow actually has the ow sound. It is not the same as the other words. It's not a k, u. That doesn't work for the spelling of this word. These kind of errors are really common in phonics materials that you pull online, that you pull from Teachers Pay Teachers, and it's something to be very aware of when we're thinking about the precision that this content demands. So we have some guidelines here for you as you're assessing quality practice materials, and hopefully these guidelines are ones that you can use rather quickly. First, you're making sure that the task is accurate. You're making sure the task is focused on the skill that's current. That's what they're practicing right then. And that it provides many reps for the kids. There has to be enough to do to make it worthwhile. These are discrete skills. And then you want to make sure it promotes independence, because ideally the reason that is so important is teachers want to be pulling small groups at this time, and students should be able to do the task on their own. This kind of practice can be done by students independently, and that is going to be a high quality experience for them if they know what they're doing and how to do it. So we'll continue to go through a few examples here. So taking a look at this task, you want to determine if you think it's high quality practice. Is it accurate? Is it focused on the current skill? Does it provide many reps for kids? And does it promote independence? Try to apply the guidance against the resource and pause the webinar if you need more time. I'm gonna highlight a few things for you and see if these are things that you found. First of all, some of you might have noticed that the A found in ant is actually a distorted vowel sound. If you are not sure what that means, try to say some other short A sounds and say ant and hear what the difference is. Feel the difference in those sounds. The bigger problem here is this is not going to promote independence, because many of the words on this page are not yet decodable for kindergartners. Short A is definitely a kindergarten skill. So, and it is likely that children might end up just matching, visual matching, and circling A words. It is very unlikely that they'll be decoding the words on the page. We're going to continue with this. Here's another task for you to take a look at and decide whether it is quality or not. Pause the webinar if you need more time. And we found this is a much stronger example. It's focused on a very specific skill, and it draws the students' attention to that skill. So notice that they have to circle the long A that's made by the AI letters, that long A sound. They have to circle it in each word. And then there are some pictures here that are stand-ins for words that are not yet decodable. So the word cloud is probably not decodable at this point. And so the pictures stand in for those words. So a student could easily do this and be expected to do this independently. Next set here is a center. So this is a center task. Take a second to decide if it meets the guidelines. Once again, pause if you need more time. So we found that for a kindergarten task, this does meet the guidelines. It's independent and it's sound-based. It's applying the skill that they should be focused on in early K. But we did want to make a caution that this type of center shouldn't last too long. This is very early in the year appropriate task that students should be done with rather quickly. And we want to make sure that they move to writing the sounds. So just a reminder that they should be writing those sounds very soon. So it's okay, but you would have to switch out that task rather frequently if you were using something like this. We got another worksheet example. So in this case, we're working on consonant sounds, X. So take a second and pause the webinar if you need to assess the quality. And there's a definite content error here. So if you didn't find it, pause again and see if you can find it. I know, David, you found it the first time we went through this.
Yeah, I remember.
It's inaccurate. So the X sound, little fun fact for you, is actually X. It's the K and the S sound together. X-ray starts with the short E sound, eh, eh. So it's actually an inaccurate task. And also there's a question about postbox and whether a student would be able to decode that word. That is unlikely to be the word that they use for what's pictured there.
Also here you're going to sometimes run into the pictures that these programs use. Might be a picture of something the students don't know. If you're in an urban area, you might not know what a postbox is.
If you're in a rural area, you might call it the mailbox. So either way, it can be helpful to go over some of those pictures with the kids ahead of time to promote that independence.
Which is exactly what we did in our school. Since the pictures tend to repeat, before each week's work, we would show the picture and say what it's a picture of, so that when they came to it a day or 2 or 3 days later, they knew it was a postbox.
So this can be a little frustrating, but have no fear. We can absolutely make this work, and we know that teachers are really good at making things work in the classroom. So how do you make it work? Well, you simply can adjust those materials. Just scan your materials ahead of time and make sure to take out any of the content that you know might not be appropriate for the kids. So that's one way that you might make a subpar piece of instructional materials work in the classroom. Another thing that you might do is adapt a task or adapt an activity. So for this task, think about, I'm letting you know that there's a yes but here. So as you're looking at whether it's quality or not, think about where you might see a small problem that would need to be adapted, and pause to do that thinking or to talk about this with your colleagues. Coming back now, hopefully you had a good conversation or thought closely about this task. We believe that this is accurate, and there are many reps, and it promotes independence, and it is focused on the current skill. But kids can really do word sorts without decoding the words. They can make visual matches with these types of tasks. So you want to think about how to make sure that this kind of task is worthwhile. So we suggest a slight adjustment to tasks like this. Just thinking about making that partner work where students have to read the words out loud together. That's one modification that you might make that can make sure this task is really true practice. Another idea is you might have students sketch or draw pictures of the words or use them in sentences so that they are connecting those sound and spelling patterns to reading the words and understanding the words' meanings. And at times there can be store-bought options as well that you may need to make slight modifications to. So an example here of a store-bought task, this is one of those pre-purchase center tasks that students are supposed to match the pictures to the ending of the words. And a modification that you can make here is just by cutting that word off. Right now it's very obviously matching just visually, but cutting the word under the picture, then kids have to really match the picture to the word by reading and understanding what the words show. So we have a little bit of focus on quality of tasks for your online discussion. We could probably do this all day. Some of you might be eager to pick up your own materials and apply this line of thinking. We are going to let you engage in a discussion about this. We've got 3 sample tasks for our discussion this week. And we would like you to note the strengths and or weaknesses, so definitely some of the tasks are stronger than others, of these 3 practice tasks that are all focused on learning that we say p for P. So P makes a p sound. So your discussion this week can focus on the quality or lack of quality of these tasks and why, how you assessed it and what you learned. Another thing we want to just draw your attention to when you're thinking about these tasks is making sure that the centers that you have going in your classroom or the student tasks that you're doing are really manageable. So you want to think about ways to set up structures that stay the same and substitute the content. So an example here of a center that students are building words using spinners, and we know that might be a good earlier in the year example. So remember the same rule that we applied to effective engagements before. What works in September should be different in June. So you might add a new spinner that represents some of the new content that you've learned over the course of the year, and students can do the same type of work. You may want them to read the words that they make and think about circling words that are real words, or noting whether they've made real or make-believe words, but you can use the same structures and substitute the content out over the course of the year, whether it be a center like this or something that is quite different, keeping that sort of predictable routine, but varying the content over the course of the year.
And that's especially important in centers where students are working independently.
Yes, absolutely. And then our final sort of guideline or rule of thumb here is less is more. It can be very ambitious to have 8 centers running simultaneously with kids transitioning between them every 5 minutes, and signals and bells can be quite exhausting. We're suggesting less high quality centers, that those will have more impact and they won't drive you crazy. So you might have one center that's just rereading old decodables, maybe independently or maybe in buddies, where students can practice their phrasing and their expression. You might have a second center that's about kind of working with that sound and spelling pattern of the week, and your third center might be your teacher-led group. But making sure to do more with less, rather than making things incredibly challenging for the teacher. So we wanted to look one more time now, as we're thinking about practice, at the opportunity that decodables give for practice, and specifically looking at these foundational skills, tasks, and games. So remember, the last part of the protocol involved using these tasks and games within the text as a way of engaging further. It happens after students are quite familiar with the text themselves, so they've already read it several times and they have answered comprehension questions about it, and they know how to read this text, and they can zoom back a little bit more closely to look at some of the features of print or sound and spelling patterns that are offered there. So you're going to get a chance to try to race my daughter Zoe through some of these tasks with a first grade text. And and see if you can do what it is that she's doing on the screen. So this task is focused on substituting vowels, medial vowel substitution. So take a look at what she's doing here.
See if you can find the word bugs.
Bug.
What would you change about the middle to make it mean something you carry things in?
Oh, instead of the U, you should get the A.
And what
that
word
would
would you make?
Bags.
Good.
And we'll see one more example here of connecting foundational skills to comprehension. You can do these types of tasks. You could do these all day. You can do them with lots of different skills, and kids really do find them fun. So just show you one more example of that.
What if you took off the S on the word pads? What would the new word be, and how
Pad.
would it? Yeah, how would
It
that?
would be one pad instead of a lot of pads.
Good. How would that change the picture?
They would be both on one pad together.
Good. Which word repeats on this page?
Hop, hop,
Can-
hop, hop, hop.
Can you do the action while you say that word?
Hop, 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 hop.
Can you do the action while you say that word? What's that word mean?
It means like you're hopping from lily pad to lily pad.
So stand up. Can you do the action while you say that word?
Hop, hop, hop.
So practice is fun. It's engaging for kids. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And just a side note here that practice really needs to include feedback. You don't get better on your own without feedback, and that's really important, and we'll get to that in Module 7.
These games that Zoe just played, I came up with this in our school to make it a regular part of how to use the decodables. If you take a look at them, you'll see that what it does is it brings the kid to focus on the phonemes, to focus on the spelling sound patterns. But in addition to that, it makes them aware of words. It makes them aware of language. So you have all these benefits in addition to it being fun. And there's all kinds of research, much of which by a guy named Stephen Stahl, I think, S-T-A-H-L, showing that any kind of games with language enhances reading proficiency and enhances enjoyment of reading. Because if you like language, you tend to like reading more. The other thing that was really cool about these games, in every school I gave them to over the years, by sometime January or February of first grade, later in the year in kindergarten, the students would start making up their own. And the teacher would give them time for everybody to make a game like that, and the students got really good at it, which was very satisfying.
It's always great when the practice that kids are doing feels like a game to them, and you know that there's an educational purpose as well. It's the best of both worlds here. So we're going to move a little bit more closely into some reading fluency guidelines. Just a reminder of the fluency standards, which are lighter in kindergarten and build on in first and become very, very dark green in second. We know we want fluent readers in second grade as they are building towards text complexity requirements. So we're going to take a second, and you can pause to do this, to just feel what disfluency feels like. We'd like you to pause the webinar and read this poem aloud as quickly as you can. So go ahead and do that now.
And with expression.
I'm curious how that went. I wish we could have heard people because we know this is another one of those tasks that some people can do well and some people very much struggle with. I know this because this comes from a poem that I got my husband for Father's Day, thinking that he would read it to our kids because he likes reading them Shel Silverstein poems. And the whole book is like this. I found out that he cannot read it to our kids because he cannot read it. He is not able to substitute the phonemes in the words the way the print calls for, and it becomes incredibly stilted when he reads. Which is really what it's like for a dysfluent reader, right? When they are reading, they are doing so much work. They are hindering their comprehension because of all of that work just reading the words. And that's a little bit like what they experience every day, especially if that was challenging for you all. You get sort of a sense of what that might be like every day for our dysfluent readers. And we know that fluency has kind of three parts. There's accuracy, being able to correctly read the words. And there's rate, how quickly you're doing that, putting them together to have automaticity. And then there's prosody, or your expressiveness, whether you can read that shows understanding of the words on the page. And this is another example of something that can vary over time. A fluent first grade reader is not guaranteed to be a fluent fourth grade reader because the complexity of the text changes. So we often see that students that were better readers in early grades may show that they are facing challenges in fluency as text complexity increases. So the good news about fluency is that we can develop fluent readers. And you want to think about reading to your readers, modeling fluent reading, reading with them, so that's choral reading, listening to them, and then having them read alone. We want them doing all of these things in order to build fluency. And all of these guidelines actually go beyond kindergarten, first and second grade. And they can work quite well if you work with students who are third grade and above who are still dysfluent. When we're thinking about this progression, we are really thinking about prioritizing accuracy first. So kindergarten and kind of beginning to mid first grade, automatic decoding of words is what's most important. And once they've built that automatic decoding, that's when they can move to rate and prosody. So earlier we were talking about ways to differentiate up for higher readers, and having them practice just expression, practice reading quickly. That's something that they should do in first and second, end of first and into second, and can do even before that if they're reaching those sort of goals around accuracy. Some grade level fluency guidance for second grade and above, just some suggestions here, is really using shared reading to do rereads and choral reading. And when you're reading for evidence, when you're doing that kind of evidence-based work with more complex text, having students find the evidence along with the student who's sharing can really help make sure that they're learning to navigate text quickly and able to practice through rereading. And then across the board, we know that in all grades, the speaking and listening standards require public speaking. So performance is a chance, an opportunity for students to practice fluent reading. Reader's theater, close reading again for presenting and arguing evidence. So you always want students to be tracking that text and getting a chance at those rereads. That's what really can build fluency for students who are not quite there.
A few things about fluency. Most students who are dysfluent in older grades are dysfluent because they decode the words too slowly or incorrectly. There are some students who decode fine with accuracy and automaticity, but they don't pause between sentences, they don't pause with punctuation, they don't pause appropriately at boundaries within the sentence, phrase boundaries. Well, number one, that's the minority. The majority of students who are dysfluent because they fail to get accurate and automatic decoding in the grades that we're talking about, K to 2. That's number one. Number two, it's way easier when students reach 4th or 5th grade and they're not fluent, but they decode with accuracy and automaticity through fluency activities to get them to pay attention to punctuation and phrase boundaries and become more fluent. Number three, there is this belief that if a student does not read out loud with fluency, they're choppy, they're slow, that doesn't mean that they can't read well, that they can't read fine silently. That is a dangerous misconception. 2 times, in 1995 and 2005, studies were done with the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the test that is done throughout the country with a sample of roughly 120,000 kids.
The NAEP.
The NAEP, thank you. In part of these studies, the first one of which, interestingly, was done by Pinnell from Fontes and Pinnell in 1995 when she was at Lesley College. The second one, I think she's still there, the second one was in 2005 by Jeannie Chall. And what they found was that the students, they took a sample of the sample, but large, like 20,000 kids, and tested their oral fluency. And virtually all of them who failed the oral fluency did poorly on the NAEP. They were below basic on the NAEP. So the notion that students who might struggle to read out loud are fine when they read silently is a dangerous, dangerous misconception. 4th point or 5th point, whatever it is, there is a section on our website, Achieve the Core, that is all about fluency. What fluency is, how you assess fluency, how you instruct with fluency. It's all there. It's written by myself and David Page, who I've worked with a lot on foundational skills and especially on fluency. Final point, older students who are weak in their decoding, they did not get the automaticity especially, it is better to work with them through predominantly fluency programs. We're talking about students past the 3rd grade. The research, as we mentioned in the opening session, on this kind of approach for kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade is beyond overwhelming. It's not like that with older students. Older students don't respond the same way to worksheets. They don't respond the same way to phonics games. They know it's not reading, and they already feel not very good about themselves because of their struggles. Fluency, however, is different. It needs to be a strong, concrete, and fluency program that's built into the day. But the good news on that part is that with less than a year, you can get kids, if you do enough fluency work, to be fluent with grade level text. And I lied. The final point is that the research with fluency shows that it's much better done with grade level text than with students independent level. Sometimes you can cheat a little bit. If a student is in the 7th grade and they're reading at a 3rd grade level, you might start with 5th grade level text, let's say. But the research clearly shows that this kind of work is done better with grade level text for the most part. That's a note for any of you who work with older children as well as only K-2 children.
I was going to refer to David's penultimate point, but now I have to refer to 2 points ago, which was sort of a setup for your task. So we actually are giving a varied task. In this case, your fluency option is option A, and that's if you work with students who are actually 2nd grade or above. So the fluency resources are on Achieve the Core, and you may have your own that you would like to pull. To note that those resources are limited by the text that we could permission for free on the web, and so you can use that approach to build your own. So we thought if you work with 2nd or above that you might be interested in trying these resources with your students this week and noting your observations about their impact. The reason those resources are for 2nd and above is, as we said, as David just said, they are connecting to grade level text. Our kindergarten and 1st grade version of this is focusing on decoding with accuracy and automaticity. So if you are not working with students 2nd or above, then we actually thought that your 2nd option could be connected to the practice part of this module. So we'd like you to find 3 sample worksheets that are either yours from your own program or that you find online, and we'd like you to evaluate their quality using the guidelines from this module. So 2 very different tasks for you to connect to practice this week, one around fluency and one around practice. We also have a few resources to share that David was previewing. So there's a 3-part series on reading fluency on Achieve the Core. You can access that through the short URL right here. And if you are tired of reading, Dr. David Page has a podcast about fluency through Unbound Ed's podcast. So you can access that from the link on the PowerPoint as well. And once again, all of these resources and so many more are on Achieve the Core. Try to keep it stocked with very vetted resources that should hopefully pass the guidelines for instructional quality on Achieve the Core. The Core Advocate Network remains an option if you'd like to get more closely involved. And if you are excited about things you've been learning, or you want to just follow us on social media, please do so through Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest, whatever suits your needs. Coming up, this is our second to last week of the course, and our next and last module will be on assessment. So thanks so much for your presence and participation, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
See you next week.